Okay. I can't sleep. It is currently 3:26 a.m. And instead of flopping around in bed feeling sorry for myself, I thought I would come and speak to you fine people. I'm going to talk about the very last drink I ever had. The drink that I am every day working to maintain and keep as my final drink. The last drink I ever had. My very last drink forever. And I'm interested to know if you're the kind of person who places importance on this kind of thing, like I do. Or if it's just me who seeks out this kind of monumental sobriety symbolism. Like my necklace here, which has a lot of symbolism for me. So if you remember yours, your last drink, tell us about it in the comments. In the meantime, brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bad Country. So, it's like this. My girlfriend and I had celebrated New Year's Eve in Budapest. It was brilliant. It was one of the best short holidays of my entire life. We had an incredible time. Certainly one of the best that we've spent together. We were in love with the city and with each other. And life had been good up to that point. We had money in the bank, work, careers were interesting, and things were happening. I had about 6 months of sobriety at that time. And as all people who have 6 months of sobriety, I felt like I was sober forever. I felt like I was cured. Oops. Too early to have this much energy. Train on the way back, on the 2nd of January, while my girlfriend was asleep in our cabin, I inexplicably took a shot of vodka in the restaurant car. Even after so many relapses and delirium tremens and arrests and psych wards and withdrawals and hospitals, even after all that, I was still naive. Still naive to think that I could take one shot of vodka and be okay. After 6 months of sobriety, that alcoholic whisper appeared in my ear to tell me that it was okay. You can take one, you're safe, you're cured. You can have one, you'll be fine. No one will know, same old bullshit. But I know, and I knew then, that one shot of vodka was never going to be one shot of vodka. As my friend in recovery, Steve, put it to me recently, that one shot of vodka is like putting a Mento in a bottle of Pepsi. That's what one shot of vodka does to me. I just explode out the top of my head immediately. It sets off an explosive chain reaction for me. And before the train had pulled back into Berlin and home, where we were living, I was already drunk. Very drunk. 6 months of sobriety just evaporated in that 2 seconds or so that it took to drink that shot. And I immediately descended into what was probably the worst relapse of them all. Not the worst in the terms of the amount I drank, because my girlfriend was still around. I was limited to the actual physical intake. But in terms of the psychology of the relapse, in terms of the sheer outpouring of depression and self-pity and self-destructiveness, that one was probably the worst. And consequences too. I was older by then, so my body didn't metabolize the alcohol as easily as it had in the past. And due to the kindling effect, the severe effects of alcohol intake were obvious really, really quickly. I quickly went into blackout, and it took less alcohol to induce the same or worse severity of the consequences. One of the consequences from that period I will never forgive myself for. There's a lot that I probably won't ever truly forgive myself for, but one in particular. For 6 months up to that point, in that period of sobriety, I had been working with a young Australian woman, not young, my age. She was a young mother, and she was trying to stand up a business kind of adjacent to my industry. She had approached me, having heard my reputation for doing such work, and wanted to work with me to help her establish her business. I was handling the marketing and the PR, and frankly, even though what happened, I'm still very proud of the work that I did. It was good work. But I'll tell you what actually happened. So she had this idea for a business. It was nothing particularly groundbreaking, but the message behind the business was very profound. I'm not sure how much detail I should go into, but basically she wanted to set up a business that supplied very meaningful, very good products to perimenopausal women or young mothers, particularly perimenopause and menopause. She was like, it was very simple things like cooling bed sheets and soothing massage oils. And normally I would be suspicious of a business like that, but I trusted her, and I knew that her intentions really were good. And she was a young mother herself. She had a vested interest. She didn't have investors or anything. She was just doing it for herself. And I wanted to be a part of that. And we did good work, and we worked fast, and it was difficult. And then my relapse in January coincided with the time that we were going to launch the business. And as a result of my relapse, at least partly, but in my head, mostly, we weren't able to launch the business, and her business collapsed before we got it off the ground. And I think back to the meetings where, because of the time difference, she had got up at 4 a.m. with her baby on her lap to have a meeting with me about this business that she was standing up, and how impressed I was that she could run a young family and also start a business at the same time, a business which I thought had potential. And I threw it all away. And I was the one who came out unscathed. I had no money in the business. I was an employee, kind of. But she had sunk a lot of money into it, a lot of time. And at least in my mind, it was me who blew it up. When it was all over, after this period, we did speak again. And she knew what had happened somehow. Just through some intuition, she knew that I had an alcohol problem, which I'd never discussed with her, and that I had relapsed. And we continued working together, and then she disappeared, and we haven't spoken again since. Not that I'm in a rush to pursue the matter, to be honest. I don't follow the 12 steps, but I do put a lot of value in things like making amends. And that's going to be a hard one. I might have to leave that a couple more years. Alcohol is sadistic. And you don't consider the collateral damage that you do while you're in a relapse. And we don't consider the damage that we can do when we betray someone's trust. Alcoholism is sadistic and selfish. It prevents you from even acknowledging that there are consequences to our actions, much less what those consequences will be. Anyway, back to the relapse. I only have fragments of my memory of that very last day. It was a January, the coldest month in Berlin, but I seem to remember that day was unseasonably warm. And I spent most of the day in my apartment, a big, nice, very high-ceilinged apartment with lots of light on both sides and a higher floor, so there were trees outside. It was quite a good place, unfortunately, to be an alcoholic. And towards the end of that relapse, things were very confusing. I had quite early begun to lose track of time and space. And although my girlfriend was around sometimes, which meant that I wasn't absolutely drinking to unconsciousness every time, towards the end of that relapse it was that. And in fact, the presence of my girlfriend, which was the first time I'd had a relapse with someone living with me. I had brought up some bad old habits. Because she was there, I would go out to drink, and I would drink the same volumes as I would have at home. And on one of the final days of the binge, I had gone out, maybe at 10 o'clock in the morning, wrapped myself up in my warm bomber jacket, and gone out. And then she didn't see me again for hours and hours and hours. And when I eventually returned home, my gorgeous bomber jacket, which I loved, was missing a sleeve. And my shirt was also missing a sleeve, so I was walking through the January day with my bare arm sticking out of my jacket. When I got home, I took it off and discovered that I had those cardiac measurement stickers on my body, like in my body hair as well, which meant that the doctors didn't even have time to shave me before they applied them. So it must have been an emergency. Which leads me to suspect what I did that day was I went out to our local corner shop, a Spatty, we call it in Berlin, and I bought a tall bottle of vodka, and I drank it so fast that I collapsed, and some good Samaritan called an ambulance for me. And then when the doctors roused me, I immediately just discharged myself and left again, and walked back home, somehow. Now that day is an absolute mystery to both me and my girlfriend. I used to wear lots of jewellery, more than I do now, and I lost it all that day. And I suspect that what happened was the doctors and nurses removed it all to give me some kind of emergency medical treatment. And then to this day, I don't even know which hospital it was. And I went to a couple afterwards to try to piece things together, but we never found out. Imagine how dangerous that is. And it's just terrible. And by the final day of the binge, I had already been saying that I needed to stop. And it was obvious that I did. But I hadn't stopped. I was still drinking while talking about stopping. I think a lot of us go through that phase. Just one more and then I'll go to the hospital. Just one more, then I'll go to the hospital. And I don't like being taken to the hospital. If I'm taken against my will, I will leave immediately, as soon as I can, go to a liquor store and start drinking again. But if I go voluntarily, the prognosis is much better that I will stay and accept the treatment. And that's how it has to be. I have to be willing to go. Like all alcoholics, I have to be willing. That comes first. We kind of have to quit on our own terms. Interventions are useful, but they only work if the person is really willing to be intervened with. And the gravitational pull of alcohol is stronger the longer you are around it. The longer you're close to alcohol, the harder it is to achieve that escape velocity you need to break out of it. I'll go to the hospital, just one more vodka, then we'll go. Then of course you feel a little bit better after that shot of vodka and you convince yourself that maybe you don't need to go this time. And that's why I have very little faith in tapering as a long-term solution or route to sobriety. It just leaves the door open, and that door, for people like me, with my drinking patterns, that door needs to be slammed and bolted, welded closed forever, from the inside. On that last day, my girlfriend got up to go to work, and I rolled over drunkenly and asked, "What time is it?" And she said, "It's 6. And there was a pause while I tried to process that answer. And eventually I said, 6 in the morning or 6 in the evening? And that might not sound like much, but it is a very revealing question. What time is it? Is that morning or evening? Because it reveals that I had already begun to lose touch with time. And that's what a binge of that severity does. You lose touch with time and you fall out of sync with the rest of the world. It's like you exist on a different timeline to everybody else. And there's not really any point in asking, what is the time? Because it's meaningless to you anyway. What difference would it make? What difference whether it's 3 o'clock in the morning, as it is almost now, or 3 in the afternoon? In alcoholism, well, it's timeless. And I also think that losing contact with time during a binge is a good indicator, or at least a warning sign, that delirium tremens is around the corner if you quit without medical supervision. Because I believe that is the beginning of, or at least it shows the potential for an incoming delusion. It's the beginning of a detachment from reality, and that's indicative of at least alcoholic hallucinosis, if not delirium tremens. We'd already tried or begun to taper down to some extent at that point, to try to get some control back over the drinking. Even though I'm cynical about tapering, tapering in this context means reducing the amount of alcohol just enough to allow me to be able to think. Right? Not to get me sober, just allow me a little bit of clarity to assess my position. And tapering doesn't work for me, but that day, that morning, I'd thrown the anchor out to slow down the boat, and I had made the decision to not drink, or to at least drink less that particular day. But I had gone into withdrawals immediately. There comes a stage when you go through delirium, when you go through withdrawal repeatedly, there comes a point where if you don't maintain the level of drinking at an incredibly high level, the moment that you even drink a little bit less, you can go into withdrawals even though you're still drinking. I can testify to that myself. You can get the beginning symptoms of withdrawal before you stop drinking, just by reducing the amount. It's horrible. I knew that I had to rough it out that day, and my girlfriend came back home at about 3 p.m. and she found me pacing around the apartment, wearing nothing but this scruffy t-shirt and nothing else. No pants, no underwear. Just pacing around in a circle in this big apartment. I must have been doing it for some time, and I remember that day. I don't remember the details, but I remember this feeling of anxiety. Like the thought of how... Have you heard that rumour that if a shark stops moving, it dies? I think that had got into my head, and I felt like if I stopped moving, I was going to die. So I was pacing around, and when she walked in, I asked her if she was alone, if she had brought anyone back with her. And she said no, and it's a weird question. It doesn't make sense, because she'd never brought anyone back home, not from work or friends or anything like that. It would have been very weird if she had come home with anybody, and she interpreted the question to be about me being half naked and whether I should put clothes on, but I don't think it was that. I think it was the beginning of a delusion. I think that I was already paranoid that there was some kind of conspiracy, or I was being surveilled somehow. And as a side note, before I get to the very last drink, I believe that was the beginning of a delusion, because the week that I was in the psych ward after this was a week absolutely characterized by paranoid delusions and hallucinations. And it had already begun at that point, on that last day. And then the next question was, did she have anything I could drink? And I needed to take the edge off the withdrawal, that old lie. And that's when it happened. My girlfriend went out and she bought a €1 shooter of vodka. One of those small bottles, it's like 2 shots in the bottle that you get in like hotel minibars, that kind of thing. And that's what she got. In most of Europe, those things are on the counter, those cheap vodka bottles, and Jägermeister too, and whiskey, are quite often right on the counter where you check out. You can buy a 40% alcohol vodka bottle as easily as you can buy a pack of chewing gum, even at like the gas stations. In Croatia, you can buy the vodka off the counter in gas stations. If it was any other addictive substance, there would be an international public outcry. We live in a culture of alcoholism, designed to get you in young, designed to be cheap, and then designed to be almost impossible to break out of. so hard to break out of that we have to set up support groups for each other. Anyone who's broken out should be proud. The odds are stacked against us. But that shooter, that anonymous little shooter of vodka, Chekhov or Popov or whatever it's called, that was my last drink ever. And I'll pause again for a moment, because I can kind of sense the creeping criticism from some of the non-alcoholics in my audience, the people who watch this stuff out of curiosity, which I'm informed repeatedly there are quite a lot of you. I can feel the urge among some people to maybe critique my girlfriend's behaviour as enabling my alcoholism. Why did she go out and buy me a shooter of vodka when I was clearly an alcoholic? To that I would say, you just don't understand. You don't understand the position she was in, that I had put her in. It's, from the outside looking in, it's so hard to reconcile some of the contradictions of not just an alcoholic's behaviour, but also the people who love the alcoholic. It's incredibly complex. And I would encourage anybody in my audience who's watching this right now, who's been in her position, to try to explain it to people who might be critical of that behaviour. Because I think that someone who has been in that position would do a better job of trying to explain how something like that might happen. But I will just add personally that as far as I'm concerned, she did everything right. After all, I am sober. I have a long stretch of sobriety as a result of the decisions that she was making in that period. And if she hadn't handled it the way that she did, and if she hadn't made the decisions that she did, if, for example, she had confronted me, or if she had called the police, or if she had offered me an ultimatum, then there's a very good chance I would have died in the bottle. That's more likely than the chance that I would have towards sobriety. I would have died in the bottle, and she knew it. And she played a dangerous game, and she walked a very fine line. But ultimately she did it perfectly. And she has since told me that she did come very close to offering me that ultimatum. So did my parents. But in the end, they all chose the more difficult option, which was to ride it out. And in the long run, time will tell, but that seems so far to have been the right decision. We will see. Once again, that's the collateral damage that we just don't consider when we are drinking. So I took that last shooter of vodka and I drank it all in one, and then I held it up for longer than necessary just to make sure I drained every last little fume, every alcohol molecule from that tiny bottle. And I felt some relief immediately. Some of the increasing momentum of the symptoms seemed to be abated slightly. And for about an hour, the withdrawal symptoms were slightly eased, or they were accelerating less quickly. But then a wave of nausea, and I started throwing up incessantly after about an hour after that last drink. And I think that would have happened even without the drink. I think that was the next phase of the withdrawal, was this kind of uncontrollable vomiting into this old orange bucket that was just down by the side of the bed. And for a solid hour, that's what I did. Just throwing up initially, and then dry heaving. I hadn't eaten anything substantial for days, so there was nothing to throw up. It was just effort. But the final shot, it did do enough to clear my thinking and make me recognise now that I needed to go back to the hospital. So that's what we did. And I walked out of the apartment with a half-packed bag, not really prepared for this because it come on fast. And then I threw up outside the taxi rank in public, still in the middle of the day, because I had to get to the hospital before the psych ward closed, and it could only be the psych ward too, for reasons I won't go into now. But I'll go into them briefly. I was already... It wasn't just physical withdrawal. I was already in a delusional withdrawal. I'd already progressed into what was clearly going to be at least alcoholic hallucinosis, or delirium tremens if it was untreated. In the end, it did extend into both of those. I threw up at the taxi rank, apologised to a German lady who saw me do it. She was walking past. Humiliating. And then for the 5-minute journey of the taxi, I was working incredibly hard not to throw up in there. There's a big fine for throwing up in a German taxi. By the time we got to the psych ward, I was waiting to speak to a doctor to be admitted. And by the time we got there outside there, the floor was already crawling with ants. It had the floor was kind of speckled, as hospital floors are sometimes. And as I looked at it, it came alive. It was a mat of ants. You ever seen those videos of in rainforests, the ants like climbing over each other and building kind of structures? That's what the floor was. And I had to bury my face in my girlfriend's shoulder to prevent myself from seeing it. And that was my last drink. And it was a blessing and a curse. Obviously a curse much more intensely, because I wish a last drink was never necessary. But it was what I needed in that moment, just to stop myself from kidding myself that I was going to be okay. Withdrawal is deceptive. And while it's telling you that you are going to die, while withdrawal is making you feel like your heart is going to stop at any moment, it's also convincing you not to seek treatment. But what that final shot did was it just parted the clouds for me very slightly, just long enough to make me throw up intensely, and then give me the clarity of mind to go and get help. I don't advise this. This is not advice. I'm just recounting it as it happened. If you're watching this wondering whether you should go and get another drink, don't. It's not going to help you in the long run. But I do wish, because of my penchant for ascribing symbolic value to everything in sobriety, I do wish that I had kept that bottle and then had it mounted in a block of glass so I could keep it on my desk and look at it every day as a constant reminder that that day, that horrible day, that horrible month-long binge, relapse and recovery in which I ruined somebody's business, nearly ruined my relationship with my girlfriend and with my family, set myself back 6 months in terms of sobriety, but also career progression, lost opportunities, all of that stuff. Having that one little bottle on my desk is a reminder that that is all it takes to throw it all away. It's like having the tooth of a shark that bit you on a necklace. Now, that was not the first time that kind of thing had happened. But I am working one day at a time to make sure it's the last time that it happens. So, don't be a stranger. If you remember your last drink and the story is not a bummer, let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you're so inclined. And thank you for watching. And as always, good luck out there.